On the last night of the year, two men stand beneath winter lights, strangers at the edge of a small-town crowd. Somewhere between laughter, music, and the hush before midnight, their eyes meet. A nervous smile, a gentle step, and a kiss that lands like a promise. Soft, steady, unexpected. In that quiet thunder, something opens. Grief loosens. Hope breathes. The new year begins not with fireworks, but with hands finding hands, and the courage to start again. Together, at last. Like, subscribe, and share. Comment your New Year memories and hopes. Join us for more heartfelt stories every week here. My name is Tom Bennett, and the last night of last year began the way a lot of quiet nights begin when you've made peace with a smaller life. I set out 2 mugs, filled them with decaf, and tucked hand warmers into the pockets of my coat. Outside, Maple Bridge was held together by twinkling lights and crusted snow, the kind that crunches under boots like sugar on a cookie. Our little town by the river is a place where everyone knows the barber's dog by name, and the deli owner announces your order as soon as he sees you coming. It's also a place where, when you've lost someone, folks bring casseroles for a week and then fold you back into the rhythm of small talk and comfort. I carried the extra gloves I keep in my coat for anyone who forgets theirs, and made my way toward the gazebo where the countdown would be. The mayor likes to make a speech with the exact same joke every year about time flying when you're waiting for spring, and people laugh with the affection you save for family. I volunteer at these things out of habit. You get used to being useful when you don't know how to be visible. It had been 6 winters since David passed, and I had learned how to be the man who fixed the coffee urns and straightened the folding chairs, who remembered people's birthdays and slipped out before anyone had the chance to ask, "How are you, really?" The air smelled like cinnamon and wool, the kind of cold that catches in your throat but doesn't bite. I spotted my neighbor, Irene, waving with her mittened hand, and I waved back. Behind her, a cluster of teenagers huddled close to a speaker playing music. Over by the cider table, someone was pouring from a thermos with a cautious hand. The someone wore a navy peacoat with a collar turned up and a knit hat that didn't quite cover his ears. His scarf was crooked, and the edge of it fluttered as he poured. He wasn't from around here, I decided. I would have noticed him. He was a few inches taller than me, with salt and pepper hair that looked neither fussy nor careless, just honest. He had the kind of hands that know how to fix things, broad and steady. When he saw me approaching with the cups, he set the thermos down and looked right at me, like he had expected me to appear. "Cider?" he asked, voice warm even in the cold. "Coffee, actually," I said, and held up the mugs as proof. "But I'm a firm believer in backup beverages." He smiled, and it changed his face. There was a kindness there that made something in my chest uncurl. "I'm Marco," he said. "My first Maple Bridge New Year's, they said I'd be put to work if I came early, and they weren't wrong." "I'm Tom," I said. "And yes, we have a strict policy of chaos made right by strangers with good intentions." He laughed, and the laugh had a small echo, like a room with wood floors. We fell easily into the sort of conversation that feels like 2 people trying on the same sweater and finding it fits both of them. He had moved up from Boston in November, he told me. A contractor who took a job restoring the front of the old post office, which our historical society had been fundraising for since the year my daughter learned to braid her hair. He'd been sleeping too little and working too much and, as he put it, forgetting to meet the town. I told him where to find the best corn muffins, which library hours were quiet, where the river path hugged the sunlight even on short days. By the time the mayor cleared his throat at the microphone and the sound crackled over the speakers, we had a little rhythm, passing people cups and napkins and exchanging small comments like, "I've never seen that many sequins in one scarf," and "Would you look at that dog sweater?" Every time he smiled, I noticed the thin white crescent of a scar near his jaw, as if kindness had once been carved in. Every time he looked at me, not past me or around me, a place I'd locked to keep safe swung open and sighed with relief. When the countdown began, we both drifted toward the bandstand, where the lights were thick as a snowfall. 10, 9. Marco looked at me with a question so gentle it barely lifted its head. 8, 7. The sound of cheers and cowbells swelled like a wave. 6, 5. He leaned a half-inch closer. searching my face the way you do when you're reading something important in small print. 4, 3. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, but with something older. A map unfolding. 2, 1. Happy New Year, we shouted with everyone else. But for the two of us, it came out like a yes to a question neither of us had felt brave enough to ask out loud. Marco's hand found mine, tentative and sure at the same time. He leaned in and I met him halfway. The kiss was not a fanfare. It was a door opening and a warm house waiting. It was the sound a snow-covered branch makes when the sun finally loosens it. It was, to my surprise and my gratitude, simple. We parted slowly, both of us a little breathless, the way you are when you realize you've been holding your breath for years without knowing it. The town swirled around us, a small snow globe shaken up, kids shrieking, people hugging, a brass band player improvising something cheerful and off-key. Marco squeezed my hand once and let it go, like a promise that asks nothing and gives everything. "Hi," he said. In that way people do when the biggest part has already been said. "Hi?" I said, and for the first time in a long time, my voice sounded like it belonged to me. We stayed after most folks had gone to houses and bars and family rooms where bowls of dip were waiting. We stacked chairs and collected stray noisemakers and talked. He told me about a kitchen he renovated once. A woman who had lost her husband and wanted to keep the kitchen the same, right down to the chipped measuring cup, and how the challenge had been to make it safer and brighter without erasing anything. I told him about teaching music at the high school for 30 years, about how my hands still made the shape of a baton sometimes when a song found me. He said he could see it. The music lodged in me like a good stubborn. When we finally stood by my car, the cold, pressing gentle fingers against our cheeks, he looked at me and said, "I don't know the rules here." "We can write our own," I said before my courage had time to hide. He grinned, a little stunned, like that was the exact answer he'd hoped for. "Would you like to get breakfast tomorrow?" he asked. "I'm told Annie's Diner is the place where pancakes are a love language." "It is," I said. 8:30? 8:30, he said, and the way he said it pulled a line straight through the night and into morning. I didn't sleep much. Not for unhappiness, which had been the reason for many sleepless nights in other years, but because I kept replaying the kiss and then trying to imagine what I'd say over coffee. There are so many ways to be careful when you're our age. You learn which questions not to ask and which pains to tuck behind a polite smile. But I didn't want careful to be the whole story anymore. I wanted brave with both feet on the ground. At Annie's, the bell over the door chimed and the warmth hit my face like I'd stuck my head into bread just out of the oven. Marco was already in a corner booth reading the specials as if the right pancake choice was a decision that deserved thought. He stood when he saw me, a small courtesy that didn't feel old-fashioned, just kind. "Hi," he said again, as if it were the word that could hold a whole morning. We ordered too much food and ate almost all of it. He told me he grew up in a tiny apartment over a store in East Boston. The kind of place where you smell everyone's dinners and the walls carry people's laughter like a hallway carries echoes. His mother had passed a few years back, and his sister lived in Florida with her grandkids, but his life had been Boston and jobs and friends who were like family, until the city felt too tight around his ribs. The first time he drove through Maplebridge, he thought, "This is a town that lets your shoulders drop." I told him about my daughter Lily, who was 30 and lived in Baltimore, a social worker who called every Sunday, and sometimes on Tuesdays when the cat she was fostering did something funny. I told him about David. I used the present tense when I spoke about him, as I always do, and then I caught myself and changed it to past without making a banner out of it. Marco listened like a man who knows that listening is a house and he knows how to hold the door open. "Do you still talk to him?" Marco asked quietly. Not because he needed proof I wasn't over it, but because he knew love doesn't stop. It just changes its job. "Every day," I said, and took a sip of coffee to steady the way my voice trembled. "But I think I'm ready to tell him different things. Not just the weather and the grocery list and the way the river looked this morning." Marco nodded, eyes warm and steady. "I'd like to be someone you tell those things to," he said, not reaching for my hand, but not needing to. "If you'd like that too." "I would," I said. and the relief that rolled through me was both new and familiar, like finally finding a path you've walked in your dreams. We left the diner with plans that weren't quite plans, an understanding that we'd see each other Tuesday after his shift at the post office job site, that I'd bring over a book he'd asked about, that we'd take a walk along the river if the ice wasn't too bossy. The sky was the pale color it gets when winter gives up arguing and just sits beside you for a while. A wind kicked up, and without thinking, he reached to straighten my scarf. He didn't linger. He just did the thing your hands do when your heart has put in a request without checking with your brain. That week was a series of small, tender starts. I stopped by the post office lot with a paper bag containing a dog-eared copy of a book about craftsmen who build with old wood and 2 granola bars I'd pretended were extra. He pulled off his work gloves and leaned against the tailgate of his truck and asked me about the oboe student who'd once played a solo so sweet it made me cry. I told him about the way the school auditorium smelled like dust and hope. And he told me about the way old bricks feel, like they carry the warmth of everyone who ever leaned against them. On Tuesday night, a snow squall blew through town, the kind that looks dramatic and then sits like a quilt. The power flickered once, twice, and then the whole house hummed with quiet. I texted him by candlelight, "You good?" A minute later, "Come over if you want. I have candles and a gas stove. Also soup. The word was as inviting as a blanket." I slipped on boots and a hat, grabbed the book of crossword puzzles I always forget to do, and made my way down 3 blocks to the house he'd rented, a small 2-story with a porch that looked like a face that wanted to smile. Inside, it smelled like garlic and rosemary and something else that felt like home. He had a pot simmering on the stove and a row of candles lined up like they were waiting for a parade. He handed me a bowl and a spoon, and we sat at the table like 2 people who had done this for years. When the soup had cooled enough to slurp without regret, we tried the crossword, left half the boxes blank, and invented words that we claimed had to be real. We talked about nothing and everything, which is to say we talked the way people do when they're building a bridge 1 plank at a time and trusting it will hold. When the house creaked as the temperature eased off, he said, "I like the quiet." "So do I," I said, "as long as I'm not alone in it all the time." He nodded. I think he wanted to say something else. I wanted to ask him how long it had been since his last real relationship, and what had gone wrong, and who had left first. I wanted to tell him that sometimes my loneliness had sharp edges, and I didn't always know how to ask someone to meet me in the places I didn't keep tidy. We both let the quiet do the talking and trusted that honesty didn't need a spotlight. When the lights flickered back and the house sighed in relief, he offered me the couch. "It's lumpy but loyal," he said. I smiled and told him I'd better get home to my own lumpy but loyal bed. He walked me to the door. We stood there for a minute with the door open to the cold, which is not what you do when you're trying to conserve heat. But sometimes doorways are little chapels, and you need the air to remind you you're alive. "Good night." "Tom," he said. "Good night, Marco," I said, and his name felt like a word my mouth had been practicing without knowing it. We found a rhythm. We didn't call it dating, not at first. We called it, "Want to go for a walk?" And "I made too much chili. Please rescue me," and "the hardware store." "Clerk is going to think we're building something illegal if we keep coming. In for 1 screw at a time." We discovered we both had a soft spot for Ella Fitzgerald and old movies where people smile with their eyes. He showed me a little scar on his forearm and told me about the time a saw kicked back and he learned to respect fear as a teacher instead of a bully. I told him about the night I cried on the kitchen floor after Lily left for college. Not because she was gone forever, but because the house had too much echo. One Saturday in February, we drove to a flea market in a neighboring town. It was the kind of place where a person could buy a lamp shaped like a fish, a stack of postcards written by people who promised to write again and maybe did, and a painting so bad it somehow turned the corner toward wonderful. We picked our way through the aisles and made up stories about who had owned what. He held up a green wool sweater with elbow patches and said, "This is a sweater that reads the instructions first and then improvises," I said. "That sweater pays its bills on time and keeps an emergency chocolate in the glove compartment." He bought it for $5. And we both knew he'd look good in it in a way that would be unfair if he weren't also a person with a soft heart. We found a box of old records and spent a half hour flipping through them. I found Ella and Billy and a Frank Sinatra that still smelled like paper and dust. At home, we set up his old turntable on the dining room table like an altar, and we danced. It wasn't anything fancy. My knee felt a little stiff in the way it does when the weather changes its mind. His left shoulder protested if he lifted it too high. But we danced slow, and our feet learned each other's ways. The ceiling light made a soft halo on his hair. He hummed along to the music, and I tucked my face into the spot between his jaw and his collarbone that felt like it had been waiting for me. "I haven't danced since," he started. And then the sentence broke because the past is a delicate thing to balance in your hand. "Me neither," I said, and we didn't finish our explanations. We were both old enough to know we didn't need to. In March, Lily called to say she'd be coming up for a weekend. And could we please go to the bakery with the pecan rolls that make all other pastries feel like they're not trying? I told her yes, and that there was someone I wanted her to meet. There was a pause on the line that may have been her smile reaching the microphone. "Dad," she said, and 1,000 conversations we hadn't had yet lined up like patient birds. "I can't wait." I was nervous. It's funny how the heart has a way of reintroducing the same jitters at every age, like a song that keeps making your foot tap, even if you're in a different pair of shoes. Marco offered to leave it up to me, to meet Lily at a coffee shop or to wait until the timing felt right. "It's your story," he said. "I'm here either way." "It's our story," I said, and he nodded as if to say, "Yes, but you get to choose when to put it on the table." We met at the bakery on a Saturday that smelled like rain not quite committed. Lily swept in like a warm front, scarf flung over her shoulder, hair pulled back, face bright as she hugged me. She turned to Marco with the kind of curiosity that's not hungry, just open. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lily." "Marco," he said. He didn't reach for her hand like a job interview. He just stood squarely and let his kindness show. "I've heard about the legendary pecan rolls. They're criminal," she said. "You'll be mad at the second one for not being the first one?" We sat and ate and laughed, and Lily told stories about her caseload that didn't break anyone's privacy, but did break your heart a little. And Marco listened with the same attention he gave to measurements and pencil marks on wood. When Lily excused herself to the restroom, she squeezed my shoulder as if to say, "You're okay. I'm okay. We're all okay." Later, she pulled me aside by the door, breath frosting, her smile soft. "He's got that good paint smell," she said. "What?" I laughed, and she rolled her eyes with affection. "You know, the kind of person who makes a place better, not by covering it up, but by tending to it." "I like him, Dad," I swallowed, "because there are things you can't brace for even when you know they're coming." "Me too," I said, and my voice found a steadiness I hadn't known I needed. "Do you feel guilty?" she asked. A question only a daughter who loves you can ask without making it a knife. "Sometimes," I said, "not because I think love is a pie with slices we take from each other. It's just that my memories of your dad, of David, have been the way I carry him. And opening the door to anything new feels like I'm rearranging a room where all the pictures are hung in careful order." She nodded. "Maybe you're making space on the shelf, not knocking anything off it." "I hope so," I said. "I know so," she said, and then she bumped my shoulder like we were both 10 years younger. Spring came slow. It usually does in Maplebridge, which tries hard and then forgets and then tries again. We started eating dinner on Marco's porch, where a small wind chime made the kind of music people say is an angel passing through and I say is the wind offering an opinion. Marco planted a basil plant in a pot, and we watched it like a character in a TV show, cheering when new leaves unfurled and worrying when it looked thirsty. We hit our first snag in April. It wasn't dramatic. We didn't yell. We didn't go to bed angry because we weren't sleeping together yet. Not because we didn't want to, but because we both felt something tender and old in the space between us and didn't want to hurry the naming of it. The snag was this. I'd kept a closet in my house as a kind of shrine. It wasn't intentional. It just happened. David's scarf and a sweater and a pair of shoes sat there, quiet and folded. The smell had faded, which is its own sorrow, but the sight of them still held an ache that told my feet where to stand. Marco came over one evening, and I opened the closet to get a board game, canasta, which is a sport in our town, and he saw the clothes. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The air shifted. My breath made a small defensive sound. He reached to touch the sleeve of the sweater and then didn't. We sat at the kitchen table and made our hands busy with apples we weren't hungry for. I still talk to him too, Marco said finally. To a man named Anthony who taught me how to laugh when the sink was leaking. He's been gone a long time, and sometimes I still turn and think, can you believe this? And then remember there's a different silence now. I exhaled. I hadn't known he had lost someone. He hadn't told me yet because we were still walking our bridges slow and steady. How do you do it? I asked. How do you hold both? I don't think it's a holding, he said. I think it's a resting. I rest one love on the other, not in a pile, but like two books on a shelf that lean against each other because they both know how to stand. We were quiet. The clock made that domestic little sound that means a house is working. I think I'm ready to make this closet into a closet again, I said, voice small, like I was asking for permission from the objects. Then I'm ready to help, he said. We took everything down together. We folded. We talked to the air because sometimes ceremony is just doing the thing with love. I kept the scarf. I would always keep the scarf. We put the sweater and the shoes in a box with a few other things that didn't need to be touched as often. Marco didn't take the box out to the car or down to the cellar. He just sat with me on the floor as if sitting were the work. After that, a different kind of light came into the house. Not brighter, just warmer. We did not become people who rushed to lock the front door in case the future came with its arms full of surprises. We became people who said, want to make tea? And hey, there's a sale on good olive oil and I got 2 bottles and come look, the basil's gone wild. One afternoon in May, Marco found a flyer for a local rescue that needed fosters for older dogs. He looked at me with a face that said he'd sell his truck to feed a dog if he had to. We could, he said. If we wanted to. We could, I said, and laughed when he pulled me into a hug like I'd just agreed to climb onto a Ferris wheel. We met Mabel on a Wednesday. She was 11, with a graying muzzle and eyes that were the color of warm tea. Part beagle, part mystery, she had a way of sitting with her hips slightly askew, regal and ridiculous all at once. She leaned against Marco's leg like she had known him in a past life, then came to me and pressed her head into my palm with a sigh. We brought her home and were immediately promoted to the clumsy, tender job of learning what she needed. She slept at the foot of the bed in a little nest Marco made from an old quilt. She licked the air in her dreams and wagged her tail when the neighbor's cat stared at her through the fence as if they were playing an ancient game. With Mabel, we were a trio. We walked the river path in the mornings, the one that finds the sun, and we learned the names of other dogs and, by extension, of their people. Wally with the funny trot, and Pearl who never met a stick she didn't think was a sword, and Buster who would only walk if someone sang. Marco did construction jobs around town, and I tutored music students in the afternoons. And in the evenings, we made dinners that were more about the chopping and the talking than about the recipes. We talked about bills and about how we liked our towels folded and about the way memory sneaks up and insists on being seen. We paid attention to the ordinary work of kindness. By June, Marco had finished the post office facade, and the Historical Society threw a small party with lemonade and cookies. The bricks glowed as if they had learned how to enjoy their own strength. I watched Marco accept compliments with a kind of shy pride, and I thought, I am falling in love with this man the way you fall asleep when you've been tired for too long, one muscle at a time. Relief and surrender. We didn't say the words yet. We didn't need to. We set a place for each other at our tables and at our edges. We met fear when it came and offered it a seat without letting it drive. Summer unfurled, slow and generous. On the 4th of July, we found a spot by the river and watched fireworks that made the water answer back in brief streaks of color. A small boy nearby kept narrating each burst. That one is a jellyfish. That one is a big pancake. And we nodded as if he were a genius, because truly he was. Marco took my hand and rested it on his knee, and I felt the vibration of laughter in his bones. He leaned over and said into my ear, "New Year's had fireworks too, but I like the quiet of our kiss better." "So did I said, and then I turned my face toward him in the stutter light and kissed him the same way. Simple and promising. In August, we drove out to a farm stand where the tomatoes are always one sneeze away from being too ripe, and the peaches smell like a decision you wouldn't regret. We bought too much and ate half of it over the sink, which is the right way to eat summer. We talked about trips we might want to take someday and places we'd been. He told me about a fall in Vermont, where the trees convinced him the world was on fire and happy about it. I told him about a summer in Maine where the ocean made me feel tiny and important at the same time. On a Friday in September, we found ourselves in the hardware store again, arguing good-naturedly about shelves. We had begun, without ever naming it, to knit our houses together. There were more of his books on my living room shelf and more of my coffee beans in his cupboard. His sweater had found a space in my drawer. My slippers were behind his door next to his boots. Love reveals itself to you by how it stacks the mail and where it hangs the keys. Maybe, he said, turning a cabinet knob in his hand like it was a coin he was thinking about spending, we should talk about a different arrangement. For the shelves, I teased. He smiled, a small tilt to his mouth that said, yes, and also I'm talking about something with more floors. For us, he said. I don't want to rush you, or me, but I like waking up and knowing my morning includes your voice, and the way you make your toast too dark, and the way you hum in the shower when you think no one can hear. I think you have to love someone a while before you can legally tell them about their toast, I said. He looked momentarily alarmed until he saw I was joking. Yes, I added. Let's talk about us. We didn't move quicker than we were ready to. We didn't start packing boxes that second. We made a plan like adults do, one that involved calendars and money and talking to ourselves just as much as to each other. We decided that by New Year's we'd be ready to make one house into our house. Which one? He asked first, and I told him I wanted him to feel like he had a say, because leaving a house you've lived in is not a small thing, and I hadn't done it in decades. He said he loved my creaky stairs, and the way the afternoon light raccooned across my living room rug. He said his rental was nice and he could make anywhere home, but he liked the way my porch taught the evening to sit down. The decision made itself without anyone needing to push. We'd sell or store the extra sofa, combine our cooking pots, find a way to fit two men's lives into one kitchen drawer of measuring spoons. As the days tipped toward fall, we had our first sharp misunderstanding, the kind of thing that could look small from the outside and felt enormous from the inside. I'd been distracted all day, distant. He'd asked twice if I was okay, and I'd said I was too quickly, which is a way of saying, please don't ask. He gave me space. I took it and then felt lost inside it and a little angry that he'd given it to me. It was an old pattern, one I'd learned when I didn't want to be a burden. The next morning, we stood in my kitchen, two people in their 50s wearing socks that did not match and faces that weren't pretending. I don't want to walk on eggshells with you, he said. I will if the eggshells are in the recipe, but I don't think they are. I think you're scared. I think I am too. You're right, I said. When I start to care more, I start to listen for the sound of something breaking. It's practice, not prophecy. I'm working on it. I don't want to be something you have to protect yourself from, he said. You're not, I said. And then I did the grown-up thing and told him exactly what had startled me. A call from the doctor about a test that needed more information, the kind of thing you fall down a hole about even though the rational part of your brain is whispering up the ladder, it's probably nothing. Come back. He listened and he didn't minimize or catastrophize. We held hands. We made a plan to call back together and ask questions in a notebook that had lines and wide margins and a place for a date at the top. Because some fears do better when they're written down. The follow-up showed nothing to worry about. And we both cried a little in the car because sometimes relief makes your knees weak. After that, our trust had a new board in it, one that would hold even if the water rose. October draped the town in sweaters, and sweaters draped us in the kind of comfort that makes you want to make soup and tell the truth. We went to the harvest fair and watched a pie-eating contest with the reverence of a sporting event. We carved a pumpkin that looked like it had opinions. We raked leaves and then watched the wind unrake them and laughed because life is like that. You do the work and then you do it again. And if you're lucky, you're doing it with someone who makes the rake feel lighter. November crept in with its bouquets of gray skies and gratitude. We took Mabel to the vet and learned she needed a little medicine for her joints, and we made the appointment into a date with extra treats and a congratulatory piece of cheese. We packed a bag and drove 2 hours to see Lily for Thanksgiving, where she had made a sweet potato casserole that could make you write poetry. Around the table, my daughter's friends asked us how we'd met, and when we said New Year's Eve, their faces softened, and one of them said, "That's exactly right." We stopped at a rest stop on the way home and shared a bag of potato chips like teenagers, laughing at a joke that wasn't funny except it was because we were both there. December arrived with its new breath, the kind that smells like pine and memory. We penciled in a date with my realtor friend to talk about putting Marco's rental on notice and making small fixes in my house before the moving truck came. We made a list of people to invite for New Year's Eve, and it was not a long list because we didn't want a crowd. We wanted a room of beloveds, Irene, of course, from next door, the barber and his husband who tell the best stories about terrible haircuts, Maureen from the library who always knows which book someone needs even when they don't, a few of Marco's crew who had become friends. Lily would drive up, she said, because a first New Year's belongs to the people you want at the start of a story. We put up a tree on the second Saturday, and we did not bicker about the lights like people on TV. We found a rhythm of one of us holding the strand, the other walking around with up-down movements, and Mabel watching like a foreman. I held an ornament that had been David's, a simple metal star, and I looked at Marco, whose hands were busy with the lights. He nodded before I asked the question. "I think he'd like being included," Marco said. "The people who made us are always invited." We hung the star in a place where it could catch the light. We stood back and watched it flicker. We didn't need angels. We had a dog sighing on the rug, and a strand of lights that worked on the first try, and a feeling that felt like the next right step. There were still moments of fear. There were hours when I thought, I'm too set in my ways and he's going to change his mind and that closet will never be just a closet. There were moments when Marco looked around my house and saw the years hanging there and felt like a guest even while his toothbrush stood next to mine like a question that had already been answered. We said these things out loud, which is the only way I know to make them less powerful. Then we made lunches and paid bills and bought a new shower curtain because the old one had admitted its age. We sealed boxes with black markers and labels, and we left one box open with the things that made a home feel like ours. The record we danced to, the chipped mug that made morning holy, the dog toy that squeaked like a rusty gate. On the morning of December 31st, a year after that first quiet kiss, we picked up bagels and cream cheese and flowers from the shop that wraps them like they're gifts, even when they're just flowers. We tied balloons to the banister and set out little paper crowns. We made a playlist that might have been too sentimental if we'd been 20, but at our age, you earn the right to be exactly as sentimental as you want. Marco stood back and surveyed the living room like it was a job site. "It's good," he said. "It feels like we didn't just invite people to a party. We invited them into our life. That was the assignment," I said. "I'm glad we got the right measurements." In the late afternoon, Lily arrived with a cooler and a smile, and she hugged us both like she was saying a prayer. People trickled in, shaking snow off their shoulders, bringing dips and laughter and a willingness to stand around in kitchens. Irene told a story about her grandsons trying to make fudge and making a new material instead, possibly useful for insulation. The barber confessed he had once given himself bangs because he was bored. Mabel patrolled for crumbs, successful and stealthy. At 11:45, we gathered in the living room. Everyone had a paper crown on their head. I said a few words, because that is a thing you do when your house holds your friends and you're standing in the place where you finally said what you want. I thanked people for coming and for their kindness, and for teaching me that a town is not just a place where the streets meet. It's a place where the stories do. Marco squeezed my shoulder and then he said a few words, quiet and steady, the way he is. He thanked the men and women who taught him how to build with his hands and with his heart. He thanked Lily for trusting him with me. He thanked me for being stubborn in the right ways and gentle in all the others. We started the countdown then, not to the sound of a microphone in a town square this time, but to the rhythm of people who loved us enough to stand close. 10, 9, 8. The clock ticked. 7, 6, 5. My heart did that old loyal thing of speeding up and then settling. 4, 3. I turned to Marco, and the room felt like it tipped us toward each other. 2, 1. We kissed, not loudly, not for show. We kissed like we had learned the steps and were still every day grateful for the music. People cheered. Someone threw some biodegradable confetti because this was not the year for sweeping up until March. Lily hugged us, and in that moment, all I could see was her face when she was 6, sticky with frosting, and the woman she is now, steady and bright, and how both those people loved me enough to say, "Keep going." We stood in the messy, beautiful aftermath of midnight, and I felt something settle in me like a book sliding into the exact right place on a shelf. This was our life, not perfect, not protected from grief or from the sharp corners of the world, but ours, and the ours mattered more than the perfect. Later, after people had gone and the house smelled like candle smoke and sugar, we sat on the rug with Mabel between us, her head on our knees. We didn't need to say much. The year had said enough in the long sentences of days, the paragraphs of ordinary chores, the punctuation of laughter that writes itself without permission. I thought about that first kiss under the town lights. How small it had been, how important, how it had folded us into a story neither of us had been sure we were allowed to have. "I love you," I said then, because sometimes the quiet needs that word to hang in it like a star. "I love you," he said, as if the words were building materials. "I want what we have, this, and all the ways it will look when we're tired, and when we're worried, and when we're laughing for no good reason." "Especially then," I said. "I want the everyday with you. The coffee and the walking the dog, the making of lists and the forgetting of lists, the music and the silence," he nodded. "New life," he said, the phrase simple as a brick. "New life together," I answered, placing the last word beside the others like a foundation stone. We went to bed, and the house breathed around us like a living thing. In the morning, I woke to the sound of Marco grinding coffee, the light not yet fully awake outside. I watched the outline of his shoulder in the doorway and felt the heaviness of years I'd carried alone shift and resettle in a way that didn't hurt. He came in with a mug and put it on the bedside table and kissed my forehead like a benediction. Mabel snored at the end of the bed like a small engine. Outside, the river made its old, faithful shushing sound. Later that day, we took a walk by the water. The path was familiar and new at the same time, the way your own name can surprise you when someone you love says it. We didn't talk about resolutions. We talked about groceries and whether the basil would survive the windowsill and how Irene's grandsons were probably trying to turn their fudge into a science fair project. And we held hands. It was not dramatic. It was simply the way we moved through the world now. The year that followed did what years do. It asked things of us. It gave us things. We had days when someone else's bad driving made us laugh, and days when the news made us hold each other and turn off the stereo. We went to the dentist and learned we were both on the cusp of needing crowns and made jokes about royalty. We argued once about the correct direction for the toilet paper, and then we solved it like adults by agreeing to buy the big package and let the roll do what it wanted. We visited the cemetery when we needed to. We told our pasts we loved them because we do, and then we shut the gate softly and walked back into the present. Sometimes I think about the version of myself who thought that first New Year's kiss was just a little spark in a dark winter. I want to tell him that yes, it was small, and yes, it was quiet, and also it was a match lighting a stove that would heat a house all year. I want to tell him that every morning would not be a miracle, and that's okay. It would be something better. A morning where he knows which spoon is his favorite, and he can find Marco's laughter even before the coffee is ready. When you fall in love at our age, people sometimes ask if it feels different, as if love itself gets creaky. I tell them the truth, it feels wiser. It feels less like a tide that drags you out past your footing and more like a river that remembers how to bend around the rocks. It feels like waking up after a good night's sleep. Not dramatic, just right. It feels like a new year every morning. Not because fireworks are going off, but because the day shows up and you say, yes, I'm here for it. Together. If you had told me 2 years ago that a crooked scarf and a cup of coffee at a town gazebo would lead me to this life, I would have smiled politely and thought, that sounds like the sort of story people make up to keep warm in winter. And yet here I am, warm in winter. Here I am, folding the laundry with a man who hums when he thinks I won't notice. Here I am, slipping a leash over a dog's head and opening the door to a morning that is ready to be walked. Here I am, finding the star on the tree every December and touching it like a note in a song I don't want to forget. We will kiss again this New Year's. We will kiss not because it is required, but because it is ours. We will kiss because we can, and because we want to, and because sometimes a kiss is not about romance in the way movies tell it. Sometimes it is about placing your mouth where it can say thank you for a year that kept its promises and for the quiet, daily courage to begin again. We will kiss because when the countdown rolls over and the clock insists it is not last year anymore, we will look at each other and still choose the same thing we chose the night we met, the tiny, steady work of love. The hands finding hands, the door opening, the warm house waiting,